The boy collapsed at the edge of his property, screaming that his sister could no longer walk, her small body limp and burning with fever after 200 miles of desperate travel. Silas Morrow had buried everyone he ever. The boy collapsed at the edge of his property, screaming that his sister could no longer walk, her small body limp and burning with fever after 200 miles of desperate travel. Silas Morrow had buried everyone he ever loved 5 years ago, but when he lifted that dying girl into his arms, he did not put her down for 3 days. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dust rose in slow spirals across the Texas Panhandle, carried by a wind that seemed to whisper of sorrows yet untold. Silas Morrow had been riding fence lines since before dawn, his weathered hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 47 years learning the language of the land. His beard had gone gray in the years since his wife passed, and the lines around his eyes told stories of droughts survived and winters endured. He was not a man given to sentiment or soft words, but neither was he cruel. 3,000 acres of unforgiving terrain, land that his grandfather had claimed and his father had built upon. Now it was his alone, a kingdom of cattle and silence, of endless horizons and memories that haunted the empty rooms of his farmhouse. His son had died in the war, his wife had followed 2 winters later, and Silas had buried his grief in work, in the relentless rhythm of ranching that left no room for dwelling on what was lost. He rose before the sun and fell into bed after it set, and in between, he poured everything he had into keeping the land alive. It was late afternoon when he first saw them, 2 small figures standing at the edge of the north road like apparitions risen from the dust itself. Silas reined in his horse, squinting against the harsh glare of the setting sun, certain that his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as his vision cleared, he saw that they were real. A boy of perhaps 10 years, clutching the hand of a smaller girl, both of them covered in road dust and wearing clothes that had seen far better days. The boy's face was streaked with dirt and tears, and even from 50 yards away, Silas could see the desperation in his stance. He urged his horse forward, approaching slowly so as not to spook them. As he drew closer, the details became clearer and more troubling. The children were thin, far too thin, with the hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes of those who had not eaten properly in weeks. The boy's shirt was torn at the shoulder, and the girl clung to him with arms that seemed almost too weak to hold on. But it was the girl's legs that caught his attention, the way they dangled limp and useless as her brother struggled to support her weight. The boy looked up at Silas with eyes that held a fierce determination beneath the exhaustion. There was something in that gaze that reminded Silas of his own son at that age, a stubborn refusal to surrender even when the odds seemed impossible. The girl's head rested against her brother's shoulder, her breathing shallow and labored, her face pale beneath the layer of dust. Silas dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He approached the children carefully, the way he might approach a wounded animal, with slow movements and gentle intentions. The boy tensed, pulling his sister closer, and Silas could see the protective instinct that drove every line of the child's body. "Easy now," Silas said, his voice rougher than he intended after so many months of speaking only to cattle and horses. "I ain't going to hurt you." The boy's chin lifted, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with exhaustion and emotion. "Sir, my sister can't walk anymore. She hasn't been able to walk for 2 days now. We've been traveling since Mama died, trying to reach our aunt in Redemption Creek, but Lily's legs just gave out and I can't carry her no more. I tried, I swear I tried, but she's getting weaker and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if the boy had been holding them inside for too long and they had finally broken free. Silas looked at the girl, at her closed eyes and the way her chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. She was perhaps 7 years old, small for her age, and even in her weakened state, there was a delicate beauty to her features that spoke of better times, of a life before whatever tragedy had set these children on the road. Without a word, Silas stepped forward and gathered the girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a collection of bird bones and fragile hopes, and when she stirred against his chest, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. He saw a blue so pale it was almost silver. She looked at him with confusion but no fear, as if she had already passed beyond the point where fear could touch her. "What's your name, son?" Silas asked the boy. "Thomas, sir. Thomas Reed. And this is Lily." "Thomas." Silas nodded slowly, shifting Lily's weight so that her head rested more comfortably against his shoulder. "How far have you come?" "Near on 200 miles, sir. Started in Miller's Crossing after Mama passed from the fever. She told us to find Aunt Clara in Redemption Creek. Said she'd take care of us. But it's been 3 weeks and Lily got sick and then her leg stopped working and I didn't know what else to do but keep walking." Silas felt something stir in his chest, something he had thought was long dead. 200 miles, walked by a 10-year-old boy carrying his sick sister, with nothing but the desperate hope of reaching family they had never met. The courage it must have taken, the love that drove each painful step, struck him with a force he had not expected. He looked down at Lily, at her pale face and labored breathing, and made a decision that would change everything. "Redemption Creek is still 40 miles from here," Silas said quietly, "and this child needs rest and food and proper care before she travels another step. My ranch is just over that ridge. You'll both come with me." Thomas's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and wariness. "We don't have money to pay you, sir. We don't have nothing but each other. I didn't ask for payment." Silas turned toward his horse, still cradling Lily against his chest. "Can you ride?" "I can manage, sir." Silas helped Thomas mount the horse, then handed Lily up to him just long enough to swing himself into the saddle. He settled the girl back into his arms, arranging her so that she was secure against his chest, and took the reins with his free hand. The sun was beginning its final descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Silas found himself thinking that perhaps this empty land of his had been waiting for something after all. Perhaps he had been waiting too, though for what he had never quite been able to name. The Morrow Ranch house rose from the prairie like a sentinel standing guard against the encroaching darkness. It was a solid structure built from timber and stone, designed to withstand the brutal winters and scorching summers that defined life in this unforgiving corner of Texas. As they approached, Thomas stared at the house with wide eyes, taking in the large barn, the corrals filled with horses, and the windmill that creaked softly in the evening breeze. For a boy who had spent 3 weeks sleeping in ditches and abandoned barns, it must have seemed like a palace. Silas dismounted carefully, never loosening his grip on Lily. The girl had fallen into a deeper sleep during the ride, her breathing still shallow but steadier than before. He could feel the fever burning through her thin dress, and he knew that time was not on their side. Whatever illness had taken hold of her needed attention, and it needed it now. "Thomas, can you manage the horse?" Silas asked. "There's a stable hand named Jorge who sleeps in the bunkhouse. Wake him and tell him to ride for town. We need Dr. Hendricks out here as fast as he can manage." The boy nodded, already sliding from the saddle with a determination that belied his exhaustion. He paused for just a moment, looking at his sister in Silas's arms, and the fear in his eyes was so raw that Silas felt compelled to offer some reassurance. "She's going to be all right," he said, though he was not entirely certain he believed it himself. "Go now, quickly." Thomas ran toward the bunkhouse, his small legs pumping with renewed energy, and Silas carried Lily up the porch steps and into the house. The interior was dark, but he knew every inch of it by heart. He navigated through the front room, past the kitchen, and into the bedroom that had once belonged to his son. It had stood empty for 5 years now, a shrine to a life cut short, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. He laid Lily on the bed as gently as he could, arranging the pillows beneath her head and drawing the quilts up around her thin body. Her eyes fluttered open again, those pale blue irises finding his face in the dim light, and for a moment she seemed to see him clearly. "Mama?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, child," Silas said softly, "but you're safe now. You're going to be all right." Her eyes closed again, and Silas found himself standing beside the bed, uncertain what to do next. He was a man accustomed to action, to solving problems with his hands and his will, but this was beyond his expertise. He knew cattle and horses and the rhythms of the land, but sick children were a mystery he had never learned to solve. He lit the oil lamp on the bedside table and studied Lily's face in the warm glow. The fever had painted bright spots of color on her cheeks, a cruel mockery of health in a face otherwise drained of vitality. Her hair was tangled and matted with dust, and her dress was little more than rags. Yet even in this state, there was something about her that tugged at the frozen places in his heart. Thomas appeared in the doorway, breathless from running. "Horge is riding for the doctor, sir. He said it would be a few hours at least." Silas nodded. "Good. Come here, son. Sit with your sister. I'm going to get some water and broth. She needs fluids if we're going to break this fever." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Silas heated water on the stove and prepared a thin broth from dried beef and vegetables. He found clean cloths and tore them into strips, soaking them in cool water to press against Lily's burning forehead. Thomas sat beside his sister's bed, holding her hand and talking to her in a low voice, telling her stories about the aunt they were going to meet and the new life that waited for them in Redemption Creek. Silas watched the boy as he worked, marveling at the strength contained in that small frame. Thomas had shouldered burdens that would have broken many grown men, had walked 200 miles with his sister on his back, and hope as his only sustenance. There was a resilience in him that Silas recognized, the kind that was forged in the fires of necessity and tempered by love. "Tell me about your mother," Silas said during a quiet moment as they sat together in the lamplight. Thomas was silent for a long moment before answering. "She was beautiful, sir. Kind too, the kindest person I ever knew. She worked as a seamstress in Miller's Crossing after our PA died in the mine collapse. She used to sing to us at night, even when she was tired from working all day, said music could heal things that medicine couldn't reach." "What happened to her?" "The fever came through town about 2 months ago. Took a lot of people. Mama held on longer than most, kept working until she couldn't stand no more. She made me promise to take care of Lily, to get her to Aunt Clara. Said it was the most important thing I would ever do." Thomas's voice broke slightly. "I'm trying to keep my promise, sir. I'm trying so hard." "I know you are," Silas said. "And you've done more than any boy should ever have to do, but you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not tonight." Around midnight, Dr. Hendricks arrived in a clatter of hooves and hurried footsteps. He was a lean man in his 60s with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and a medical bag that had seen decades of use. Silas had known him for 30 years and trusted him more than he trusted most men. The doctor examined Lily thoroughly while Silas and Thomas waited in the hallway. When he emerged, his expression was grave but not hopeless. "It's exhaustion primarily, complicated by dehydration and what appears to be a nervous condition affecting her legs. I've seen it before in cases of extreme stress or trauma. Her body is simply shut down from the ordeal." "Will she walk again?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "With rest, proper nutrition, and time, there's a good chance, but she cannot be moved, not for several days at minimum, possibly longer. Any additional strain could cause permanent damage." Silas looked at Thomas, at the fear and hope warring in the boy's eyes, and made his second decision of the night. "Then she stays here. They both stay here, for as long as it takes." The first night stretched into a second, and the second into a third. Silas did not put Lily down for those 3 days, not truly. When she needed to be moved, he carried her. When she needed comfort in the dark hours when fever dreams tormented her sleep, he held her against his chest and walked the floors of his house, humming half-remembered lullabies that his own mother had sung to him decades ago. He slept in snatches, sitting in the chair beside her bed, waking at every change in her breathing, every small sound that might signal distress. Thomas watched this transformation with a mixture of wonder and confusion. He had expected charity from this stern-faced rancher, perhaps a meal and a place to sleep before they were sent on their way. What he had not expected was the tenderness that seemed to emerge from somewhere deep within the man, a gentleness that contradicted everything about his rough exterior. When Silas carried Lily to the window so she could see the sunrise, when he spooned broth into her mouth with infinite patience, when he changed the cool cloths on her forehead throughout the long nights, Thomas began to understand that they had stumbled upon something rare in this harsh world. On the second day, Lily's fever broke. She opened her eyes with more clarity than she had shown since they arrived, and when she saw Silas's weathered face looking down at her, she did not flinch or cry out. Instead, she reached up with one small hand and touched his beard, as if confirming that he was real. "You stayed," she whispered. "I did," Silas replied, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "Mama said angels would come when we needed them most. Are you an angel?" Silas felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he had built stone by stone in the years since losing everyone he loved. "No, child, just a man, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The recovery was slow but steady. Dr. Hendricks visited every day for the first week, monitoring Lily's progress and adjusting his treatments as needed. He was cautiously optimistic about her legs, explaining that the paralysis appeared to be temporary, a protective response from a body that had been pushed far beyond its limits. With rest and gentle exercises, he believed she would walk again, though it might take weeks or even months. Silas converted the downstairs study into a bedroom for Thomas, not wanting to separate the siblings by too great a distance. He arranged for new clothes to be brought from town, proper shoes and dresses for Lily, sturdy trousers and shirts for Thomas. He hired a woman from Redemption Creek to help with cooking and cleaning, a widow named Martha Higgins who had raised 6 children of her own and knew exactly how to care for young ones. The ranch hands, men who had known Silas as a stern and solitary employer, watched these developments with undisguised amazement. They whispered among themselves about the change that had come over their boss, the way his eyes seemed less hollow, his movements less mechanical. Jorge, who had been with the ranch for 15 years, remarked that it was as if someone had opened a window in a house that had been sealed shut for too long. Thomas, freed from the crushing responsibility of keeping his sister alive, began to explore the ranch with the curiosity natural to boys his age. He followed the hands as they worked, asking questions about cattle and horses and the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Silas found himself answering those questions in the evenings, explaining the intricacies of breeding programs and grazing rotations, of water management and the art of reading weather patterns. The boy absorbed information like parched earth absorbs rain, hungry for knowledge and eager to prove himself useful. One evening, as Silas carried Lily to the porch to watch the sunset, she asked him about the photograph that hung above the fireplace. It showed a young man in military uniform, handsome and proud, with Silas's eyes and his late wife's gentle smile. "That's my son," Silas said quietly. "His name was Daniel. Where is he now?" Silas was silent for a long moment, looking out at the horizon where the sun was painting the clouds in shades of crimson and gold. "He died in the war 5 years ago. He was 22 years old." Lily's small hand found his and squeezed with surprising strength. "I'm sorry. Mama said the people we love never really leave us. They just go somewhere we can't see them for a while. Your mama was a wise woman." "She was." Lily nestled closer against his chest. "Mr. Silas, can I tell you something?" "You can tell me anything, child." "When I was sick, when everything was dark and scary, I heard someone talking to me. It wasn't Thomas and it wasn't you. It was a man's voice. And he said I needed to hold on, that someone was waiting for me. Do you think that was Daniel?" Silas felt tears prick at his eyes, the first tears he had shed in years. He blinked them back, but his voice was unsteady when he replied, "I think it might have been. Daniel always did have a soft spot for children. He wanted to be a teacher before the war came." They sat together in silence as the sun completed its descent, the old rancher and the broken little girl, both carrying wounds that the world could not see. But in that silence, something was being built, a bridge between two souls that had each known too much loss too young. Silas did not understand it fully, could not have explained it if asked, but he knew that these children had brought something back into his life that he had thought was gone forever. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep and Thomas had retired to his room with a book about animal husbandry that Silas had lent him, the rancher sat alone on the porch and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed his grandfather's arrival on this land, his father's struggles, his own joys and sorrows. They were indifferent, those distant lights, and yet tonight they seemed somehow closer, as if they were keeping watch over the souls below. "I don't know what you're doing," Silas murmured to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone who had ever mattered to him. "But I'm grateful. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for these days." 2 weeks passed, and the Morrow Ranch began to transform in ways both visible and invisible. The most obvious change was the sound of children's voices echoing through rooms that had known only silence for years. Thomas's laughter rang out from the corrals where he was learning to rope fence posts under Yorta's patient instruction. Lily's softer voice could be heard from the porch where she sat wrapped in quilts, reading aloud from the books that Silas had begun ordering from the catalog in town. But the deeper changes were happening within Silas himself, in the places where grief had calcified into something cold and immovable. He found himself rising earlier than necessary, eager to check on Lily before beginning his day's work. He discovered that he could not pass through a room without pausing to ensure she was comfortable, that her water glass was full, that she had everything she needed within reach. Martha Higgins noticed and said nothing, but there was a knowing look in her eyes that spoke of understanding. She had seen men broken by loss before, and she recognized the tentative process of mending when she witnessed it. Lily's legs were showing signs of improvement. Dr. Hendricks had designed a series of exercises that Silas performed with her each morning and evening, gentle movements designed to restore strength and sensation to her atrophied muscles. At first she could barely feel his hands on her feet, but gradually the numbness receded, replaced by tingling and then by genuine sensation. The first time she wiggled her toes on command, both she and Silas wept with relief. Thomas, meanwhile, was proving himself invaluable around the ranch. He had a natural affinity for animals that the hands remarked upon with genuine admiration. Horses that were skittish around grown men seemed to calm in his presence, and even the cantankerous old bull that had injured 2 workers over the years allowed Thomas to approach him without incident. Silas watched the boy work and saw echoes of Daniel, the same quiet competence, the same instinctive understanding of creatures that could not speak for themselves. It was during the 3rd week that the letter arrived from Redemption Creek. Silas had sent word to Clara Morrison, the children's aunt, informing her of their whereabouts and Lily's condition. The reply came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a postal rider who looked relieved to have completed his journey across the empty miles. Silas read the letter alone in his study, his heart sinking with each carefully penned line. Clara Morrison expressed gratitude for the care her niece and nephew had received, but she made it clear that her circumstances had changed since her sister had last written. Her husband had died the previous winter, leaving debts that had consumed their small farm. She was now living with her new husband's family in conditions that barely accommodated her own needs. Taking in 2 children, one of whom required ongoing medical care, was simply not possible. The letter concluded with an apology that felt hollow, and a suggestion that perhaps the children could be placed in one of the church orphanages that operated in the larger towns. Clara would pray for their welfare, she assured him, and would send what money she could spare when her situation improved. But for now, she could offer nothing more than her regrets. Silas sat with the letter in his hands for a long time, staring at words that represented the shattering of the children's hopes. They had walked 200 miles toward a promise that no longer existed, had survived hardships that would have defeated most adults, all for the dream of a home that was not waiting for them. How was he supposed to tell them? How could he look into Thomas's determined eyes and Lily's trusting face and explain that their aunt had abandoned them? He did not tell them that day, or the next. He needed time to think, to consider the options that lay before them. The orphanage was out of the question. He knew that immediately. He had heard stories about those institutions, about children worked like servants and treated with casual cruelty. Thomas and Lily deserved better than to become numbers in some administrator's ledger, stripped of their names and their dignity. But what was the alternative? Silas was a 57-year-old widower with no experience raising children. His own son had been mostly grown by the time Silas had taken over the ranch, and even then, it had been Margaret who had handled the tender work of nurturing and guidance. Silas had provided, had protected, had taught Daniel the skills he would need to survive on the frontier, but the soft arts of parenthood had belonged to his wife. He watched Thomas and Lily together on the porch one evening, the boy reading to his sister from a book of adventure stories while she listened with rapt attention. They had only each other now, these two children who had already lost everything once. The thought of them being separated, sent to different orphanages or farmed out to different families, was unbearable. They were a unit, forged by shared suffering into something unbreakable. "You're thinking about keeping them?" Martha's voice startled him. She'd approached so quietly that he had not heard her footsteps. She stood beside him now, her weathered face illuminated by the lamplight from the window. "I don't know what I'm thinking," Silas admitted. "Yes, you do. You've known since the moment you picked that little girl up off the road. I've watched you these past weeks, Silas. You've come back to life in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. Those children need a home, and you need a reason to keep going. Seems to me the answer is obvious. I'm too old. I don't know anything about raising children properly." "Nobody does until they do it," Martha said with a shrug. "Besides, you've been doing just fine so far. That girl looks at you like you hung the moon, and that boy follows you around like a shadow. They've already chosen you, whether you've realized it or not." Silas said nothing, but Martha's words settled into his mind like seeds finding fertile ground. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the answer had been obvious from the beginning, and he had simply been too afraid to see it. The conversation with the children came on a Sunday morning, after Martha had served breakfast and the house had settled into its weekend quiet. Silas had spent the previous night composing and discarding speeches in his mind, trying to find the right words to deliver news that would break their hearts. In the end, he decided that honesty was the only approach that honored what they had been through together. He gathered them in the parlor. Lily settled on the sofa with her legs stretched out before her, Thomas standing protectively beside his sister, as he always did when sensing something important was about to happen. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the floor and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. "I received a letter from your Aunt Clara," Silas began, and he saw hope flare in both pairs of eyes before he had even finished the sentence. He hated what he was about to do, hated the necessity of extinguishing that hope, but they deserved the truth. "She cannot take you in. Her circumstances have changed, and she is not able to provide a home for you." The silence that followed was devastating. Thomas's face went through a rapid succession of emotions, disbelief giving way to anger, then to a resignation that was heartbreaking in one so young. Lily simply stared at Silas, her blue eyes filling with tears that she seemed too exhausted to shed. "What happens to us now?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully controlled. "The orphanage?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than Silas had intended. He softened his tone and continued, "I will not allow that. I have been thinking about this for several days now, and I want to make you an offer. It is entirely your choice, and I will respect whatever you decide." He paused, gathering his courage. This moment felt more terrifying than any he had faced in his decades of ranching, more consequential than any business deal or natural disaster. He was about to offer these children something he was not certain he had the right to give. "I would like you to stay here with me permanently, not as guests or charity cases, but as family. I know I am not your father, and I would never try to replace him or your mother, but I can provide a home, an education, a future. Thomas, this ranch could be yours someday if you want it. Lily, you would have everything you need to grow strong and healthy. And you would have each other, always." Thomas stared at him with an expression that Silas could not read. "You want to adopt us?" "If you will have me. I know I am old and set in my ways. I know this life is hard and the winters are long, but I have come to care for you both more than I thought possible, and the idea of you leaving causes me more pain than I have felt in a very long time." Lily spoke then, her voice small but clear. "Would we call you Papa?" The question struck Silas like a physical blow. He had not considered the details, had not thought about what this new relationship would look like in practice. The word Papa belonged to another man, a man these children had loved and lost. He had no right to claim it. "You can call me whatever feels right to you," he said carefully. "Silas or Mr. Morrow or something else entirely. The title matters less than what we build together." Thomas looked at his sister, and something passed between them, the silent communication of siblings who had learned to rely on each other completely. Then he looked back at Silas, and for the first time since the conversation began, there was something like hope in his eyes. "Can we have some time to think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." They retreated to Lily's room, closing the door behind them, and Silas sat alone in the parlor, waiting. He could hear their voices through the walls, too low to make out words but clearly engaged in serious discussion. The clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes, each one feeling like an hour, each one bringing him closer to an answer that would determine the course of the rest of his life. It was nearly noon when Thomas emerged. He walked into the parlor with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted, looking more like a young man than a boy in that moment. Lily was in his arms, her legs still too weak to carry her far, but her face alight with an expression that made Silas's heart skip. "We have conditions," Thomas said seriously. Silas nodded, keeping his face neutral despite the hope that was threatening to overwhelm him. "I am listening." "First, we want to visit our parents' graves every year, on the anniversary of their deaths. We need to remember where we came from." "That can be arranged. What else?" "Second, Lily wants to keep learning. She wants to go to school when she is well enough, real school, not just lessons at home. She is smart, smarter than me, and she deserves the chance to become whatever she wants to be." Silas looked at Lily, saw the fierce intelligence burning behind those pale blue eyes. "There is a school in Redemption Creek. When you are ready, you will attend, and if you outgrow what they can teach you, we will find a way to send you further." Thomas swallowed hard. "Third, and this is the most important one, we stay together. No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, you never separate us. We are all we have." "You are all I have too," Silas said quietly. "I give you my word. This family, whatever shape it takes, will not be broken." Thomas looked at his sister one more time, receiving her small nod of approval. Then he looked back at Silas, and a smile broke across his dirt-streaked face, the first genuine smile Silas had seen from him since that desperate afternoon on the road. "Then we accept. We will stay. We will be your family." Lily reached out her arms toward Silas, and he moved to take her, settling her against his chest in the position that had become so familiar over the past weeks. She wrapped her thin arms around his neck and whispered into his ear, "Thank you, Papa." The words shattered something inside him and rebuilt it simultaneously. Silas held his daughter close and felt the tears finally fall, washing away years of frozen grief. The weeks that followed were filled with the practical work of building a family. Silas rode into Redemption Creek to consult with Judge Harrison about the legal requirements for adoption, discovering that the process was simpler than he had feared. With Clara Morrison's written consent, obtained through a carefully worded letter that Silas composed himself, and the testimony of Dr. Hendricks and Reverend Patterson regarding his fitness as a guardian, the adoption could be finalized within a month. The judge, who had known Silas for 2 decades, expressed quiet approval of the arrangement and promised to expedite the paperwork. While Silas handled the legal matters, Martha took charge of preparing the house for its new permanent residence. Thomas's temporary room in the study was transformed into a proper bedroom, with new furniture ordered from the catalog and curtains sewn by Martha's own skilled hands. Lily's room received similar attention, the stark functionality of Daniel's old space softened with feminine touches that made it feel less like a memorial and more like a home. Fresh paint-covered walls that had grown dingy with neglect, and new rugs warmed floors that had known only bare wood for years. Lily's recovery continued at a pace that Dr. Hendricks called remarkable. By the 4th week, she could stand with assistance, her legs trembling but supporting her weight for longer periods each day. By the 6th week, she was taking halting steps between Silas and Thomas, her face set with fierce concentration as she willed her body to obey her commands. The exercises had become a family ritual, conducted each morning on the front porch, where the fresh air and open sky seemed to lend strength to her efforts. Thomas thrived in his new environment with an enthusiasm that sometimes startled Silas. The boy devoured knowledge like a starving man at a feast, asking endless questions about cattle breeding and land management, about weather patterns and water rights, about the history of the ranch and the people who had built it. Silas found himself sharing stories he had not told in years, tales of his grandfather's arrival in Texas, his father's struggles during the lean years, his own journey from reluctant heir to devoted steward of the land. But not everything was easy. There were nights when Lily woke screaming from nightmares, calling for a mother who could not answer. There were moments when Thomas's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath the capable exterior. Silas learned to navigate these storms with patience he had not known he possessed, holding Lily until her sobs subsided, sitting with Thomas in silence until the boy was ready to speak. Grief, he discovered, was not something you conquered, but something you learned to carry, and these children had been carrying more than their share. The town's reaction to the adoption was mixed. Some residents welcomed the news, expressing admiration for Silas's generosity and hoped that the children would bring new life to the isolated ranch. Others were less charitable, whispering about the impropriety of an unmarried man raising a young girl, questioning his motives and his capabilities. Silas ignored the gossip with the same stoic indifference he had always shown to public opinion, but he noticed that it affected Thomas, who came home from a trip to the general store one afternoon with clenched fists and fury in his eyes. "Tommy Patterson said you only took us in for free labor," Thomas spat, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Said orphans are cheaper than hired hands, and that is the only reason you kept us." Silas set down the harness he had been mending and gave Thomas his full attention. "Do you believe that?" "No, sir, but it made me so angry I wanted to hit him." "Did you?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "No, I remembered what you said about a man being measured by his restraint, not his fists, but I wanted to. I wanted to hurt him for saying those things." Silas nodded slowly. "Wanting to is not the same as doing. You controlled yourself, and that is what matters. As for what Tommy Patterson thinks, he is a boy repeating words he heard from adults who do not understand what we have become to each other. Their ignorance is not your burden to carry. But it is not fair. You have been kinder to us than anyone else in the world. You saved Lily's life. How can they say such things? People fear what they do not understand, and they mock what they fear. A man who was content to live alone for 5 years, suddenly taking in 2 orphan children, does not fit their expectations. They will come around in time, once they see that this family is real and lasting. Until then, we prove them wrong by being exactly who we are." Thomas considered this for a moment, then nodded with the gravity of someone accepting a difficult truth. "I will try to remember that." The adoption was finalized on a warm afternoon in late spring, in Judge Harrison's chambers with Dr. Hendricks and Martha Higgins serving as witnesses. Silas signed the documents that made Thomas and Lily legally his children, his hands steady but his heart racing with an emotion he could not name. When the judge pronounced the adoption complete, Lily, who had insisted on standing for the occasion, threw her arms around Silas's waist with a strength that surprised everyone in the room. "We have a family now," she whispered. "A real family." Thomas stood apart, his expression carefully neutral, but Silas could see the tears he was fighting to contain. He reached out and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the tension beneath his palm. "We do," Silas confirmed, "and nothing will ever change that." They rode home in the wagon, Lily sitting between Silas and Thomas, her legs dangling over the edge of the seat. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the prairie, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink that seemed to celebrate the transformation that had taken place. They were no longer 3 separate souls bound by circumstance. They were a family, forged in hardship and sealed by law, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Summer arrived with a vengeance, bringing scorching days and nights that offered little relief from the relentless heat. The ranch work intensified as Silas and his hands prepared for the annual cattle drive that would take the herd to market in Abilene. It was a journey of nearly 200 miles, requiring weeks of preparation and careful planning. In years past, Silas had led the drive himself, spending days in the saddle and nights sleeping under the stars. But this year was different. This year, he had a family waiting for him at home. The decision to stay behind did not come easily. Silas had never missed a cattle drive in 30 years of ranching, and the prospect of entrusting his livelihood to others went against every instinct he possessed. But Lily still needed daily care, still required the exercises that were slowly restoring strength to her legs. And Thomas, despite his eagerness to prove himself, was too young to accompany the drive and too important to leave without guidance. Jorge would lead the drive this year, with 3 experienced hands to support him. It was a leap of faith that tested Silas's capacity for trust. The night before the drive departed, Silas sat on the porch with Thomas, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The boy had been quiet all evening, processing the significance of what was about to happen. This drive represented the ranch's primary income for the year, and Thomas understood enough about business to know what failure would mean. "What if something goes wrong?" Thomas asked. "What if they lose the herd, or the prices are bad, or Jorge makes a mistake?" "Then we will face it together," Silas replied. "A ranch this size survives because of the land and the cattle, but it thrives because of the people who work it. Jorge has been with me for 15 years. He knows what he is doing, and he knows what is at stake. We have to trust him." "Is that hard for you, trusting other people?" Silas considered the question carefully. "It used to be. After I lost Daniel and Margaret, I stopped trusting much of anything. I thought if I kept everyone at a distance, I could not be hurt again. But that was not living. That was just waiting to die." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Lily and I were the same way after Mama passed. We did not want to trust anyone because everyone we trusted had left us. But then you came along and you did not leave. You stayed when you could have sent us away. Staying was easier than leaving would have been." "That is not true, and you know it." Thomas turned to look at Silas with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. "Staying meant opening yourself up to getting hurt again. It meant risking everything you had built to protect yourself. You chose us anyway, and that is the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do." Silas felt his throat tighten with emotion he could not express. This boy, who had carried his sister 200 miles across hostile territory, who had faced starvation and exhaustion and despair without breaking, thought that Silas was brave. The irony was not lost on him. "We chose each other," Silas said finally. "That is what family means." The cattle drive departed at dawn, a river of livestock flowing across the prairie toward distant markets. Silas watched from the hill overlooking the north pasture, Thomas beside him on his own horse, Lily waving from the wagon where Martha had brought her to witness the spectacle. It was a moment of transition, the old way of doing things giving way to something new and uncertain. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful. Without the demands of the drive consuming his attention, Silas found himself with time he had never had before. He spent hours teaching Thomas the finer points of horsemanship, progressing from basic riding to the more advanced skills required for ranch work. He read aloud to Lily in the evenings, working through the stack of books that continued to grow as he ordered new volumes from every catalog he could find. He learned to cook simple meals under Martha's patient instruction, discovering that the kitchen was not the mysterious realm he had always assumed it to be. Lily's progress accelerated during these weeks. By midsummer, she was walking the length of the porch without assistance, her steps still uncertain, but growing stronger each day. Dr. Hendricks declared her recovery nothing short of miraculous, attributing it to youth, determination, and what he privately told Silas was the healing power of being loved. The exercises continued, but they had transformed from medical necessity into something closer to play, with Thomas inventing games that challenged Lily's balance and coordination while making her laugh. The bond between the siblings deepened in ways that touched Silas profoundly. Thomas had spent so long being his sister's protector that he struggled sometimes to let go of that role to allow her the independence she was increasingly capable of claiming. There were arguments, sharp words exchanged in the way of all siblings, but they always ended in reconciliation. Lily would not stay angry at the brother who had carried her through darkness, and Thomas could not stay frustrated with the sister whose survival had given his life purpose. Silas watched them and saw echoes of his own relationship with his younger brother. Dead now for 20 years, but still alive in memory. Family was a strange thing, he reflected. It broke you and healed you in equal measure, demanded everything you had and gave back more than you could measure. He had thought that part of his life was over, had resigned himself to ending his days alone in a house full of ghosts. But ghosts could not laugh the way Lily laughed when Thomas tickled her feet during exercises. Ghosts could not ask the endless questions that Thomas asked about everything under the sun. Ghosts could not fill a house with life the way these children filled his. When word came that the cattle drive had succeeded, that Jorge was returning with payment exceeding expectations, Silas felt relief wash over him. But it was a distant relief, secondary to the joy he felt watching his children race to greet the returning riders. Autumn arrived with a palette of gold and crimson, the prairie grasses bending under winds that carried the first hints of winter's approach. The ranch had settled into rhythms that felt both new and eternal, as if the Morrow family had always existed in this configuration. Thomas had started formal lessons with a tutor Silas had hired from town, a retired schoolmaster named Mr. Carrington, who marveled at the boy's appetite for learning. Lily, now walking with only a slight limp that Dr. Hendricks assured them would fade with time, had begun joining the lessons, proving herself every bit as sharp as her brother had claimed. It was during this season of settling that trouble came calling in the form of a man named Virgil Crane. He arrived at the ranch on a gray October afternoon, riding a black horse and wearing clothes that spoke of city money rather than frontier practicality. Silas met him on the porch, instinctively positioning himself between the stranger and the house where his children were studying with Mr. Carrington. "Mr. Morrow," Crane said, dismounting with the casual grace of someone accustomed to making entrances. "I represent the Western Children's Aid Society. We have received concerning reports about 2 minors residing on your property under irregular circumstances." Silas felt ice form in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. "Thomas and Lily Morrow are my legally adopted children. There is nothing irregular about their circumstances." "So you say." Crane produced a leather folder from his saddlebag and began leafing through documents. "Yet our records indicate that these children were abandoned on a public road, that you took them in without proper authority, and that you are an unmarried man of advanced years with no experience raising children. These are precisely the conditions that lead to exploitation and abuse." "Your records are incomplete," Silas replied, his voice steady despite the rage building beneath his calm exterior. "The adoption was approved by Judge Harrison of Redemption Creek, with full legal documentation and the written consent of their nearest living relative. Dr. Hendricks and Reverend Patterson provided testimony regarding my fitness as a guardian. Everything was done properly and legally." Crane's smile did not reach his eyes. "Paperwork can be arranged, especially in remote areas where oversight is limited. The society has a responsibility to ensure the welfare of all children, particularly those in vulnerable situations. I will need to inspect the premises and interview the children privately to determine if they are being properly cared for. You will do no such thing." The voice came from behind Silas, and he turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his young face set with the same fierce determination that had carried him 200 miles across hostile territory. Lily stood beside him, her hand clasped in her brother's, her pale blue eyes fixed on Crane with an intensity that made the man take an involuntary step backward. "Thomas, Lily, go back inside," Silas said quietly. "No, sir." Thomas stepped onto the porch, positioning himself beside Silas. "This man wants to take us away. I can see it in his eyes. He does not care about our welfare. He cares about something else, and I want to know what it is." Crane's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something calculating beneath the mask of concern. Young man, I am here to help you. If you are being mistreated or held against your will, you can tell me. I have the authority to remove you to a proper facility where you will be safe. Safe? Lily's voice was clear and strong, carrying none of the frailty that had marked her early weeks at the ranch. We were dying on that road when Papa found us. I could not walk. Thomas could barely stand. We had nothing except each other and a promise that turned out to be empty. Papa carried me for 3 days. He brought doctors and bought medicine and held me through the nightmares. He gave us a home when no one else would. That is what safe looks like, mister. Not some facility where they separate brothers and sisters and work children like animals. Crane's expression hardened. I see he has trained you well, but children are not always the best judges of their own situations. The law gives the society authority to investigate claims of improper care, and I intend to exercise that authority. Then you will exercise it through proper legal channels, Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. You will present your concerns to Judge Harrison, who will review the evidence and make a determination. You will not set foot in my house. You will not speak to my children without my presence. And you will not take them anywhere under any circumstances. Is that clear? For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Silas was acutely aware of Thomas standing beside him, of Lily clutching her brother's hand, of everything he had built over the past months hanging in the balance. This man represented a threat more insidious than any physical danger, the cold machinery of institutions that claim to protect children while grinding their spirits to dust. Finally, Crane returned his documents to the folder and mounted his horse. This is not over, Mr. Morrow. The society has resources and connections that extend far beyond this backwater territory. We will be watching, and when you make a mistake, we will be there. He rode away without looking back, leaving silence in his wake. Silas stood on the porch until the rider had disappeared over the horizon, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Someone had sent this man, someone with knowledge of the children and an interest in disrupting the family Silas had built. The question was who and why? Papa? Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. Is he going to take us away? Silas turned and knelt before his daughter, taking her small hands in his weathered ones. No one is taking you anywhere. I promised you that this family would not be broken, and I meant it. Whatever comes, we face it together. Do you understand? She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. Beside her, Thomas stood with his jaw set and his hands clenched, a boy who had already learned too much about the cruelty of the world, but who refused to surrender to it. Together, Thomas repeated, always together. The investigation into Virgil Crane began the following morning. Silas rode into Redemption Creek at first light, leaving Thomas and Lily in Martha's capable care with strict instructions to admit no one to the property. His first stop was Judge Harrison's office, where he recounted the previous day's confrontation in detail. The judge listened with growing concern, his weathered face darkening as Silas described Crane's veiled threats and suspicious demeanor. The Western Children's Aid Society, Harrison repeated, turning the name over as if tasting something bitter. I have heard of them, though not in any official capacity. They operate primarily in the eastern states, placing orphaned children with families who need cheap labor. Some call it charity, others call it something considerably less noble. He mentioned connections and resources, Silas said. Someone sent him here, someone who knew about the children and wanted them removed from my care. I need to know who and why. Harrison nodded slowly. Leave it with me. I have contacts in Austin who may be able to shed light on this organization and its interests in our territory. In the meantime, I would advise you to document everything. Keep records of the children's education, their medical care, their daily routines. If this matter comes to a formal hearing, you will need evidence of their welfare under your guardianship. Silas spent the next week building a fortress of documentation. He obtained written statements from Dr. Hendricks detailing Lily's remarkable recovery and ongoing health. He secured reports from Mr. Carrington praising both children's academic progress and emotional stability. He gathered testimonials from Martha, from Jorge, from every ranch hand who had witnessed the transformation of two desperate orphans into thriving members of a loving family. Each document was copied and stored in multiple locations, insurance against the destruction or theft of evidence. But it was Thomas who uncovered the crucial piece of the puzzle. The boy had been reading through old newspapers that Mr. Carrington had brought for a lesson on current events when he noticed a small article buried in the back pages. It concerned a lawsuit filed against the Western Children's Aid Society by a family in Missouri whose adopted daughter had been forcibly removed by society agents and placed with a wealthy industrialist who needed domestic servants. The lawsuit had been dismissed on procedural grounds, but the article mentioned that the society had financial ties to several prominent businessmen who profited from the placement of children in labor-intensive situations. "Papa, look at this," Thomas said, bringing the newspaper to Silas that evening. "The society is not about helping children at all. It is about selling them to people who want workers they do not have to pay." Silas read the article twice, his anger building with each word. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a pattern that made terrible sense. Somewhere, someone had learned about Thomas and Lily, had recognized their vulnerability, and had seen an opportunity for profit. The question remained who had initiated the contact and why they had targeted his family specifically. The answer came a week later in the form of a letter from Judge Harrison. The judge had traced the complaint against Silas to its source, a filing made by one Clara Morrison of Redemption Creek. The children's aunt, the woman who had refused to take them in, had apparently changed her mind about their welfare, or rather she had found a way to profit from children she had once discarded. "She sold them," Silas said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Their own aunt sold information about them to an organization that traffics in children." Martha, who had been present when the letter arrived, shook her head in disgust. "Some people have no souls. Those children walked 200 miles to find her, and she repaid them with betrayal." The confrontation with Clara Morrison took place in Judge Harrison's chambers, with the judge presiding and Dr. Hendricks present as a witness. Clara was a thin woman with sharp features and nervous hands, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking escape. Beside her sat Virgil Crane, his earlier smugness replaced by visible unease as the scope of the proceedings became clear. "Mrs. Morrison," Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you signed documents consenting to the adoption of your niece and nephew by Mr. Silas Morrow. You acknowledged that you were unable to provide for them and agreed that adoption was in their best interests. Is this correct?" "I did not understand what I was signing," Clara stammered. "I was pressured, confused. I did not know what he intended to do with them." "And yet, 3 weeks after signing those documents, you contacted the Western Children's Aid Society and filed a complaint alleging improper care. You provided them with detailed information about the children's whereabouts and circumstances. You accepted payment for this information, payment which Mr. Crane's own records indicate was substantial." Clara's face went pale. "I was trying to protect them. I heard stories about that man, about how he was keeping those children isolated on his ranch. I was worried." "You were worried." Silas spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that made Clara flinch. "You refused to take them in when they had nothing. You abandoned them to whatever fate might find them. And when you learned that they had found a home, found someone who loved them and cared for them, you tried to sell them into servitude. That is not worry. That is greed wrapped in the pretense of concern." Crane attempted to intervene. "The Society's intentions are entirely charitable. We place children in situations where they can contribute to society while receiving proper care and guidance. You place children as unpaid laborers with wealthy families who pay the Society handsomely for the privilege," Judge Harrison interrupted. "I have documentation of 17 such placements in the past 2 years alone, all involving children who were removed from loving homes on spurious grounds. This is not charity. This is commerce in human lives, and it ends here." The judgment came swiftly. Clara Morrison was found in violation of her consent agreement and barred from any future contact with Thomas or Lily. Virgil Crane was ordered to leave the territory immediately and warned that any further interference with the Morrow family would result in criminal charges. The Western Children's Aid Society was referred to federal authorities for investigation of their practices across multiple states. As they left the courthouse, Thomas looked up at Silas with an expression of profound relief. "It is really over?" "It is really over," Silas confirmed. "No one will ever try to separate this family again." 5 years passed like water flowing through an open hand, each season bringing changes that built upon the foundation laid during those first desperate months. The Morrow Ranch prospered under Silas's careful stewardship, but more importantly, it thrived as a home filled with the sounds of life and love that had been absent for so long. The empty rooms that had once echoed with silence now rang with laughter, with arguments, with all the messy, beautiful noise of a family growing together. Thomas had grown into a young man of 15, tall and strong with his father's determined jaw and his mother's gentle eyes. He had proven himself invaluable to the ranch operations, taking on responsibilities that would have challenged men twice his age. Silas had begun teaching him the business side of ranching, the contracts and negotiations and financial planning that would one day fall to him. The boy who had carried his sister 200 miles had become a leader, respected by the hands and trusted by his father to make decisions that mattered. Lily had blossomed into a bright 12-year-old whose limp had faded to nothing more than a memory. She had inherited her mother's love of learning and had long since outgrown what Mr. Carrington could teach her. Silas had made arrangements for her to attend a proper academy in Austin the following year, though the thought of her leaving, even temporarily, caused an ache in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. She spoke of becoming a doctor, of helping children the way Dr. Hendricks had helped her, and Silas had no doubt that she would achieve whatever she set her mind to accomplish. The ranch house itself had transformed over the years. Martha had eventually agreed to marry Jorge, and they had built a cottage on the property where they could have privacy while remaining close to the family they had helped raise. New buildings had sprouted across the land, a larger barn, additional bunkhouses for the growing crew, a schoolhouse where Lily sometimes taught the younger children of the ranch hands. The kitchen garden that Silas and Lily had planted together during her recovery had expanded into a substantial operation that provided vegetables for the entire community. On this particular evening, the 5th anniversary of the day Silas had found 2 desperate children on a dusty road, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, this annual remembrance, a moment to reflect on how far they had come and to honor the journey that had brought them together. Thomas sat on the porch rail, his long legs dangling over the edge, while Lily curled up in the rocking chair that had once belonged to Margaret Morrow. Silas occupied his usual spot, the worn wooden chair where he had spent countless evenings watching the horizon and counting his blessings. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying the deeper tones of approaching manhood. "When I asked what would happen to us?" Silas nodded slowly. "I told you that you did not have to carry the burden alone anymore, that we would face whatever came together." "I did not believe you," Thomas admitted. "I wanted to, but I had stopped believing in anything by then. People had let us down so many times. I figured you would be the same, that you would help us for a while and then send us on our way when we became inconvenient." "What changed your mind?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "It was the 3rd night when Lily's fever was at its worst. I woke up around midnight and came to check on her, and you were still there sitting beside her bed. You had not slept in days, I could see it in your face, but you were still there, still holding her hand, still fighting for her life as if she were your own blood." He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. "That was when I knew. You were not going to leave us. You were not going to give up. You were going to be our father, whether any of us had planned it that way or not." Lily rose from her chair and crossed to where Silas sat, settling onto the arm of his chair and leaning her head against his shoulder. "I knew from the moment you picked me up off that road," she said softly. "I was so sick and so scared, but when you held me, I felt safe for the first time since Mama died. I told Thomas later that an angel had found us, and he said I was delirious from fever. But I was right, was I not, Papa? You were our angel." Silas felt the familiar tightness in his throat that these children always seemed to provoke. "I was just a broken old man who had forgotten how to live," he said. "You two saved me every bit as much as I saved you, maybe more." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the prairie ablaze. In the distance, cattle lowed their evening songs, and the windmill creaked its eternal rhythm. The world continued its ancient turning, indifferent to the small human dramas that played out beneath its vast expanse. But here on this porch, in this moment, three people who had found each other against impossible odds sat together in perfect contentment. "I have been thinking," Silas said after a long silence, "about the future of this ranch, about what happens when I'm gone." "Papa, do not talk like that," Lily protested. "Hush, child. I'm not dying tomorrow, but I am not young either. A man my age has to think about these things." He looked at Thomas, at the young man his son had become. "This land has been in the Morrow family for 3 generations. When I adopted you, you became Morrows, which means this legacy belongs to you now, both of you. I want you to know that whatever paths you choose, whether you stay here or venture out into the world, this will always be your home. This land will always be your inheritance, and this family will always be yours." Thomas met his father's eyes with a steady gaze that held no trace of the frightened boy he had once been. "We are not going anywhere, Papa. This is where we belong. This is where we will always belong." Lily nodded her agreement, her arm tightening around Silas's shoulders. "Together," she said, echoing the word that had become their family's creed, "always together." The stars emerged one by one as darkness settled over the prairie, the same stars that had watched over this land for millennia. But tonight they seemed to shine with particular brightness, as if celebrating the miracle of 3 broken souls who had found wholeness in each other. Silas Morrow sat on his porch with his children beside him and understood, perhaps for the first time, that love was not something you found or earned or deserved. It was something that found you, often in the most unexpected moments, and transformed everything it touched. He had lifted a dying girl from a dusty road 5 years ago and had not put her down for 3 days. In doing so, he had lifted himself from a grave of his own making and had discovered that it was never too late to begin again.